Okay, so I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement, which is that here in Fort Collins, we're on the unceded lands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and the Ute peoples. I would also like to just commemorate that today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. I think a day that is important to mark every year. And I wanted to also thank all the people who contributed to the Denis Roussel Fellowship to create that. Mostly Rachel Wilson and many of Denis' friends. Denis Rousseau was a very talented artist. He was an incredible mentor and very dedicated to alternative photography and sort of adventures in photography and new ways to do things. And unfortunately, he passed at an early age. And so this fellowship is a way to mark his and honor his legacy as a mentor, as an artist, as someone who pushed the boundaries of photography. And as I said a little bit ago, Kei Ito is the 2021 fellow, voted unanimously very early on by our committee, who I'd like to thank. And that selection committee is made up of Mark Sink, Samantha Johnson, and Natasha Seidnick. So with that, Kei Ito has an MFA from Maryland Institute College of Art, a BFA from RIT, has numerous solo and group shows nationally and internationally. He's in the permanent collections of MOCP, Norton Museum of Art, RIT, MICA, and many others. And he's had countless interviews done with him and countless speaking engagements. We are really honored to have Kei here today to deliver his artist talk.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful introduction. And I want to thank first, I really want to quickly thank you, Center for Fine Art Photography and Denis Roussel Foundation for making this opportunity possible. I'm really excited and honored to partake in this fellowship to expand the possibility of photography as media. I can't imagine, I can't think of any better fellowship than this for me to partake on. So thank you. Okay, let me share my screen for quickly so you can see my presentation. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. I stand among the ashes of nuclear weaponry. An atomic light of 1945 is distinctly burned into my retinas. The increased nuclear armament worldwide and ramping up nuclear tension between the world powers harken back to my grandfather's experience during the bombing of Hiroshima. My grandfather, Takeshi Ito, was a high school student when he witnessed a great tragedy that destroyed nearly everything in Hiroshima. He survived the bombing, yet he lost many of his family members from the explosion and radiation poisoning. After fleeing from Hiroshima, he became a college professor and a profound anti-nuclear activist who established much support for A-bomb victims, including a healthcare system specifically designed for the survivors. As an activist and author, my grandfather fought against the use of nuclear weaponry throughout his life until he too passed away from cancer when I was 9 years old. Actually, I don't remember too much of him telling me about his experience in Hiroshima and all the suffering that followed. And I now regret not asking these questions. However, I do remember him telling me that the day in Hiroshima was like hundreds of suns lighting up the sky. This statement of hundreds of suns haunted my childhood and even until today. So I was born in Tokyo and grew up there until I was 15 years old. Then I moved to New Zealand, where I found my passion for photography. A few years later, I came to States to study photography at RIT and receiving my BFA from there. And I moved to Baltimore, Maryland to attend MICA for my MFA. So as the beginning of my photographer's journey, I was most interested in the idea of the camera as how can I create something that's uniquely to photography as a media? Elements such as blurriness, film noise, and time is something I was really interested in. But also around this same time, I realized I really enjoy exhibiting my prints on the floor, ceiling, and even suspended on the ceiling. And soon later, I realized my passion for installation art. It was this moment I realized that a photograph can exist outside of a frame. So I started to express my nuclear heritage in my artwork during my MFA at MICA. I actually suffered a great deal of how to express this matter in photographic subject. If you think about a camera and a lens is to capture what is in front of you, how do I capture something that is internal, invisible, and gone, such as radiation, memory, and death? My answer was to abandon the camera and instead to use more direct approach that uses core essential part of photography, light. So the first and origin of my irradiated atomic journey is sun gazing theory. In order to express the connection between the sun and my family history regarding my grandfather's statement of witnessing hundreds of suns lighting up the sky, I have created 108 prints and 200-foot long scroll made by exposing type C photographic paper to sunlight, timed by duration of my breath. If some of you are not familiar with the type C photographic paper, is essentially it's simply as the color darkroom, the one you can easily get from, say, if you go to CVS to have prints made. That is a type of the paper I use. It has a capability of reproduce almost any spectrum of the color, and I always find it really fascinating. Unfortunately, it's a dying method. The only place I can process the print is there's only one place in Baltimore, two places in New York, and one place in California. It's quite unfortunate. It's started disappearing. Anyway, so the pattern on the prints and the scroll correspond to my breath. In the darkened room, I pull the paper in front of the small aperture to expose the paper to the direct sunlight while inhaling and pause when exhaling, resulting an image that is directly influenced by the strength of the sun and length of my each breath. The large dark circle on the scroll is where I was exhaling my breath, and thin line is when I was inhaling. I repeated this act for 108 times, echoing the number's ritualistic significance in Japanese Buddhism and my childhood. Throughout New Year's Eve to New Year's Day, all of the Japanese temples strike human-sized bell 108 times to rid us of our evil passions and desire, and to purify our souls, which sometimes can be seen as an act of redemption. So the number 108 became a motif in my art making, along with the use of sunlight. The whole process of creating these prints became a ritualistic image making. The mark of the atomic blast upon my grandfather's life and upon his breath was passed on to me. And now you can see it as the shadow of this print. So as I mentioned, excuse me, sunlight became a large component in my art making. And I soon started to use the sunlight of the specific day to make the artwork. This Infertile American Dream is a perfect example of this practice. So this is a triptych of photograms created by exposing sea print with an unbuilt wooden model house to the sunlight of the day the 2016 election result announcing Donald Trump as the next president. At that period, I was getting ready for my immigration application, making America my new home. So his anti-immigrant belief and his nuclear armament policy devastated me. Political divides have deepened, and nuclear war seems closer on the horizon than it has ever been in my lifetime. The realization of the home, in both physical and spiritual sense, can be taken away as quickly as 30 minutes by a single missile and the chain reaction that would follow. After we reach the point of no return, the American dream will be unsustainable. An empty and barren wasteland filled with nothing but ash left for the future generation. Like the unconstructed home in infertile American dream, our children will not be able to have a chance to conceive their ideal vision of home for the future. So this project was actually later adopted as an art billboard in New York City, organized by 14 by 48 Art Billboard Project Group. It was located near the Graham Avenue L station in Brooklyn. The interesting thing about this project was this particular billboard was supposed to be installed a block away from Times Square. However, a project sponsor that owned the billboard backed down after learning my work was criticizing former President Trump. So the organization needed to find a new donor, which led me to install this piece in Brooklyn. It was one of the first time I've ever encountered a sort of censorship and learned the sensitive nature of the public art. As part of my practice to push photography as media, and also to question what can be photography, I sometimes utilize something as simple as ash and soot or burnt book as a medium. A luminescent shadow is a series of 240 glass slides projected by 3 carousel slide projector. This piece was influenced by the idea of the nuclear winter. If some of you don't know what is nuclear winter is, if the nuclear explosion was, if the explosion caused by nuclear weapon will be so large that radioactive ash and soot will enter the Earth's atmosphere, and it stays there blocking the sunlight, which lead to the decrease in temperature, thus creating a long-lasting artificial winter, along with covering the ground with the deadly radioactive ash and nuclear fallout. So these images are captured on a glass slide, and it was formed by exposing a glass plate to flame and causing soot to form. Then using brush and paint medium, I fixed the soot on the glass plate. It resulted in an image that is imprint of the heat, but also it's such an organic shape that it might remain one of a cancer cell. The carousel projector automatically advances every 30 seconds, creating an endless moving image of a excuse me, creating an endless moving image of an imagined reenactment of the ash of our nuclear past and the possible future of the nuclear winter. And again, this uses projector, but it itself doesn't have anything photography about it. It doesn't have light sensitiveness. It doesn't use camera. It just uses apparatus of photographic equipment. But by using these equipment, I'm questioning by showing this artwork, is this photography? And I say, yes, it is kind of photography. So in my recent artwork, I started to collaborate with my longtime friend and a sound artist, Andrew Paul Kuiper. We first met during the grad school at MICA. We quickly became friend and housemate. And soon we discovered we share something quite amazing. We were sitting in the dining room past midnight, the exact same room that you see on the picture right now. I was talking about my nuclear heritage and my grandfather's experience in Hiroshima. He was quiet for the entire time. Some might say he was in shock. He said that his grandfather was an engineer who worked on building the atomic bomb as a part of the Manhattan Project. That night, we cried together, we hugged together, and decided to sworn to make something together in the future. So this is the first project we ever worked on, called Ash Lexicon Silver Plate. So Ash Lexicon Silver Plate is a multimedia installation that contains 2-channel audio piece and 108 film canisters from the 1940s, filled with ash from the burnt Japanese dictionary, identical to the dictionary my grandfather once owned. According to one of my, excuse me, according to one of the books my grandfather wrote, after surviving the bombing, my grandfather hurried back to his home, which was located near Ground Zero. When he reached his home, the only thing he saw was the charred remain of his house and a burnt Japanese dictionary he has once cherished. The dictionary was completely burned, but the shape remained as a book. Upon a close examination, he saw that the white page of the dictionary turned black and the ink on the page turned white, as if he was looking at a photographic negative. And it was really fascinated. I was really fascinated by the fact my grandfather's expression of calling this non-photographic object a piece of film negative. And I had to recreate what my grandfather witnessed. So I managed to find an identical dictionary in a vintage store in Japan. I brought it back to my studio in Baltimore and I burned it to recreate my grandfather's story. Interestingly enough, the same thing happened. The white page turned into black and black ink turns into white. You can kind of see it right here. So I was displaying this piece locally multiple times, juxtaposed with a picture I took in Hiroshima. But as you would imagine, this piece was extremely fragile. So it's so fragile, I couldn't even take it from my studio to the gallery. So I really needed to think a solution to have it be able to exhibit in different places. And here's the other thing about my art making philosophy is that the artwork shouldn't be static, meaning I encourage my artwork to sometimes evolve into something completely different. So I was thinking to evolve this artwork and for the easier transportation, what can I do? The solution I came up with, I deconstructed the dictionary, made it into the small pieces, and stuffed them into the film canister from World War II. If my grandfather mistaken the burnt dictionary as a photonegative, what better vessel to contain this ash of culture and history than these film canisters? In this installation, these canisters were placed on 2 burnt studs, forming an X-shaped shadow on the ground. My collaborator, Andrew Paul Kuiper, created the 2-channel audio piece, which played through 2 speakers. His soundscape was inspired by Enola Gay, the specifically modified B-29 Super Fortress bomber used in the atomic attack in Hiroshima, which is actually, you can visit and see the actual Enola Gay in Virginia, the Space and Aircraft Museum, I believe that's the name of it. I saw it 2 years ago. It's quite a feeling seeing a device that might have caused my grandfather's death. But in the same time, I was being there with Andrew really made me feel like we are finding the mutual ground that we can talk about, we can understand each other, which was really interesting. So that led us to After Image Requiem, probably the largest installation I ever made so far. So After Image Requiem is a large-scale visual and sound installation containing 108 human-scale photograms and a 4-channel sound made by Andrew Paul Kuiper. He created the sound portraying the bomb's production created with recording he took from the Atomic Heritage Sites from New Mexico and Chicago. We actually took a trip to New Mexico, Los Alamos, to visit the place that the first A-bomb was developed. And he took some recordings, he mixed it, and he played it from each corner of the installation. As you can see, a speaker on each corner. So this piece was exhibited in several different ways, depending on the space. As you can see, this is particular exhibit at the Southeastern Center for Contemporary Art, where we place the prints not only on the ground, but on the wall. This piece was debuted at the Baltimore War Memorial in 2018. One of the reasons why we chose this building was, say, if DC and Baltimore actually goes under the actual nuclear missile attack, this building is the place that's going to be used as a makeshift hospital and to do the triage. Thus, the wounded people will be laid on the ground, similar to how my prints are laid in the exhibit. These C prints were made by exposing the darkroom paper to sunlight, as I always do, which is my signature move. But in this time, I was using my own body on top, which refers to the engraved people's shadow near Hiroshima and Nagasaki's ground zero. The heat of the explosion was hotter than the core of the sun, vaporizing people's body instantly, leaving only the shadow on the ground. An example of this Hiroshima shadow can actually be seen at the Hiroshima Peace Museum. They actually cut this section off and have it as a permanent exhibit. You can visit and see the shadow in person, which I first saw when I was 5, 6 years old, leaving a significant impression, but perhaps some trauma too. I specifically use my body to create the prints as a way of showing and inscribe it was passed on to me. Our bodies are being captured through time and history and film and DNA. Now I am using that inherited light to create these prints. In other words, I'm using my own body as a camera to expose these light to the prints. The space was lit only with a single spotlight, casting the audience's shadow on the prints. By seeing their own shadow overlap with my body of irradiated shadows, the audience will hopefully realize that they are also part of this nuclear legacy of today. As Kuiper's sound plays above in the air, my bodies lay on the ground. Our grandfather's position are echoed in the space, but our stance have changed. Each print is a player for the future. So continuing the theme, I explored with the collaboration with Andrew, which is all about the bridge in the gap between United States and Japanese trauma. My recent work expands to the often forgotten American nuclear weapon victim, downwinders. Growing up in Japan, many thought the bombing victim of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were sort of the necessary sacrifice for the peace. And after moving to America, I heard the same sentiment about downwinders. Some of the first A-bomb victims were Americans who worked on both development and testing of the first bomb. Most of them were unaware of the deadly and invisible threat of the radiation. But after the war, the US government continued nuclear testing across the nation, especially in Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. And those forgotten American casualties, civilians living around the testing sites, are now known as the downwinders. As you can see in this picture, the mushroom cloud in the ground, but the family is just looking through the window casually, not thinking of big deal. I was recently invited to the University of Utah in Salt Lake City as a Marva and John Warnock artist in resident, which allowed me to research on the history of downwinders in their special archives dedicated to its history. It's their library, and there's a good chunk of the space dedicated for the old archives of the downwinders. So I Fu Witnessed is one of the project I made out of the residency in Utah. It is the collection of sea prints depicting 108 eyes. This includes eyes of 54 American downwinders and 54 eyes of the Japanese A-bomb victims. Stares out unblinking, unblinking and anonymous. The original image I took to make these prints were curated from the archives, books, video interviews, and even the images I gathered from my own family albums. The prints were made, then later mixed up before installing, making it unclear of which one is a Japanese or US victim. It was my way of showing the nuclear weapon affects everyone the same way, no matter what their nationality. As they collectively stare back at us, their eyes became a monument of the nameless atomic testimony. And it is one of the newest projects I did. And in a way, like it really embodies my way of my art making is not, my artwork is not really trying to seek to place a blame, but to illuminate a light on the often hidden and invisible issue that is unfortunately still relevant today. By bridging the past to the present, I hope I can lead you on the journey of the grief, remembrance, hope, and healing, and create some, making something better for the future by knowing both sides of the trauma, and only then we can heal from these traumas. Technically, I have it end here, but I have a little bit of time. Hamida, do you want to jump in and tell me how am I doing with the time?
Yeah, you're doing great. Yeah, go ahead and show
Should I?
the other
Okay.
slides.
Okay. So this is the exhibit I'm doing right now in DC area. Unfortunately, this was installed on December, but unfortunately, no one have seen the exhibit since because of the COVID. And this building I'm showing right now is a governmental building. It's a part of a symphony hall. Name of the place is Symphony Hall Art Center in DC. which is kind of unfortunate. I spent a lots of time making this installation exhibit, but no one have seen it, which is quite unfortunate. But I was kind of trying something new in this particular exhibit. I usually don't use a literal aspect of the art making in my artwork. I rarely use word in my artwork, but I kind of wanted to explore making some of the new work with the idea of the poetry and the literature. Thus, the name of the exhibit is Atomic Sentence. It's both sentence as a sentence of the language, but atomic sentence, it's a sentence to death, or sentence to be bombed. Some of the new project, specifically, maybe I can talk about, oh yes, big thing about the theme, also the second theme I had for this exhibit is mutant. And the funny thing about how I came to make this piece was I was riding an Uber from my studio to my home about 10 p.m. It was the African-American gentleman. We're really nice. We chatted a little bit. And he was asking like what I do. And I was like, I'm artist. I make work about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he cuts me off and saying, you know what I think of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? You know, these people who living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that these people who bombed and their children and grandchildren, they are mutants. Do you know what I mean? And I was blown away. I wasn't angry. I was fascinated by it. I never thought the idea of I'm myself being a mutant. So I went back home. I started to write it down, some of the idea. And what the first thing I wrote was, am I a mutant? And I wrote like right beneath it, I wrote, I am a mutant. But then again, I wrote, am I a mutant? And the question just repeated itself. Thus, I made this piece. It's called I Am a Mutant. Both I am a mutant. Am I a mutant? So this is kind of like a beginning of like this literature, kind of like a visual poetry piece. And I was using a marquee, you know, the one that people used to use on the theater, to place it on the top of the theater to announce which movie is going to be released soon or what movie is on right now. I used to have a part-time job changing the marquee. So I actually had a lot of broken marquee that they just gave it to us, gave it to me. So I was using these as a stencil to make monograms or photograms. So some of the other piece, this one is, can I fly? Can I breathe fire? Can I glow in the dark? I intentionally made it no space, wrote it vertically left to right. It kind of reflects my like background as a Japanese. That's how we read, how we write. No space. It always a vertical most of the time. But kind of like as an immigrant in United States, I'm trying to incorporate both sides to trying to make kind of like a hybrid culture in my artwork. This one is the never-ending light show inside of me. And so it's funny, I shown this to like, I brought people in my studio, showing it to my friend, critic, other colleagues. Only two, out of like a 20 people, only 2 people could read it right away. I need to give them the hint of like, yeah, you need to read it from the left to right bottom corner. You need to read it vertically. So which is kind of funny. It became kind of like a game. And the part of this exhibit is I tried to make it more playful, or at least fun, because this place is accessible. The main audience for this place is children and non-art people. So I was using a lot of motif, the symbol, icon that people can recognize. This one is a Godzilla. the obvious icon of the nuclear tragedy, but it's also a monster. So I placed the figure of the Godzilla and exposed it different time and more like extreme shadow to the point it became unrecognizable. Um, in some ways, a transmutation. Um, and in the middle of this exhibit, you see all of the superheroes that I grew up with: Spider-Man, Superman, Godzilla, Hulk. But when you think about it, these superheroes are all gain the power from radiation, exposure to the radiation. And I grew up with that. And until that guy told me I'm a mutant, I never really had the thought of how I perceive mutant and how I was told to think about mutant. Because when we look at the pop media, the radiation is an amazing thing. It gives you ability to fly. It gives you ability to glow in the dark. It's like, it's a fantastic thing. But in reality, I've witnessed so many, including my grandfather, witnessing so many people died from cancer as a form of the radiation poisoning, or the cause of the result of the radiation exposure. So I always thought it's interesting. I still love them as a childhood heroes, but in the same time, like, I find it interesting that how media portray these things is such an amazing thing. And it has something to do with like nuclear energy and all the thing, but I'm not going too much on the detail of the this piece. Oh wait, and Hamida, you need to stop me like when I'm going over or something, because I can talk forever.
Well, I would like to let everyone know that if you have questions, if you'd like to put them in the chat, and then or when Kei is finished, we can you can turn on your camera and turn and unmute yourself and ask the question. But go ahead. This is really interesting. I'd love to hear more about these pieces.
No, of course. Sorry, I don't have a clock to see on my screen
Oh,
for
you're
some
fine.
reason. So I can.
So we're at just around 40 minutes, and
Okay, perfect.
as soon as I said what I said, someone said, "Please keep talking. This is an amazing presentation."
No, thank you. No, thank you for saying that. I can go on and on forever.
Good. Good. This is amazing. Please keep going.
Absolutely, thank you. So this particular piece, to me, I have like probably 20 pieces, and almost every single one of the pieces new piece for like specifically made for this exhibit, because it was COVID. There was nothing to do, nothing else to do. So, but to me, this piece to the left, this piece is, to me, is the main piece for the exhibit. Just because it's not just because it's sorry, I'm just there we go. Not just because it's a sculptural piece, but also this is something part of a larger project I'm working on. So currently, as you see in my background, this is my studio. I live in Creative Alliance. I don't know any of you know what Creative Alliance is. It's a place. It's a residency in Baltimore. Amy Sherrill, she is the one who painted Michelle Obama's painting. Her studio used to be across the hallway. As soon as she got the commission, she moved to New Jersey and like make millions. So good for her. But so this is the like kind of like art community space. So it's a residency is 3 years, and it kind of like at the end of the residency, it gives us the opportunity to put the solo show. So I was thinking like they have a beautiful place. I Foo Witness, the big space, was actually part of the Creative Alliance's gallery. And I was thinking like, what can I make that something activate the space? So I was conceptualizing like this particular piece, which is it's the waxed twine hung from the ceiling, and on the tip it's a plumb bob. Plumb bob is the kind of like a well, I don't have it. I usually have it right here, but it's actually it's a level, but it's a level for the house. It's hung from the ceiling for the architect to tell if the house is straight or it needs to go up a little bit. It's a kind of like a weird tool, but this idea of the tool that to specifically to find out if the ground is level, and I was thinking of like, you know what the bomb did? It made everything flat. And there's a few pictures I've seen on the after like bomb was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A lot of scientists and the U.S. soldier moved into Hiroshima and Nagasaki and taking all of the records. How long is the shadow? How long is the blast went to? How many people oh, people who was in this area got this much of the burn, this person got. So like a part of it was make sure like to see how much flatter the ground got. And I was thinking like, this is fascinating. I should use this material to make some artwork. So what's on the ground is a framed photogram. Each one has a photogram saying a random words. This one says mother. Some says shoes, clouds. So I mentioned like my grandfather wrote a few books regarding the bombing of Hiroshima and his experience and the collective thoughts of what the bomb did. So I picked up one of his book, start searching through and kind of like a stop randomly, look at the first noun I found and wrote it down. I repeated 108 times, and it was kind of fascinating. Some of the stuff is as heavy as death, the bomb, fire, but some of the stuff is popcorn. It's like it's really random, but in the same time, by doing this for 108 times across the space, I'm trying to portray what can be taken away when the bomb is exploded. Absolutely everything. It doesn't matter what it is. You just pick one. It's gonna get consumed by the atomic light. Like it's just how it is. Maybe if you put the universe, then it may not be consumed. But if you like place everything in the house, books, frames, artwork, camera, glasses, it's gonna get consumed by light. Thus, I named the piece "Our Looming Ground Zero," because this ground zero could be anywhere right now. Especially living in Baltimore, so close to DC, it's like if the nuclear war happens, I definitely gonna get perished in the nuclear light. So some of the stuff says me in the frame, saying just me, and others says you, because you, like if the only nuclear war happens, most likely you will be perished in the nuclear light too. So this is the kind of the project I'm working on. It's gonna be debuted, or the opening for the exhibit is August 6th, 2021, which is the day the bomb was dropped in Hiroshima. So I think I can't think of any better day to kick off this exhibit, and I'm really excited about it. But yeah, that's pretty much it for what's going on right now. And for this fellowship, I really want to keep continuing exploring the idea of the downwinders. I think that was such a needed topic. And surprisingly, today is the day of the Downwinders Remembrance Day. Today, commemoration day, as well as the Holocaust Day, which is quite interesting. And sorry, I just keep popping up in my head. Doomsday Clock revealed. So if any of you don't know what Doomsday Clock is, Doomsday Clock is a bunch of scientists get gather in DC and determine how close are we from the complete destruction from the nuclear war. It's published by National Committee of, sorry, I just can't think of the name, but it get revealed every year, and it has been 110 seconds, and it's actually closest to the point. The last time it was got this close was Cold War, and they renew it today, actually last night, and it's still 110 seconds, meaning even though there's a lots of progressive treaty and a lots of good thing happened out of like past 2 years, we still are facing nuclear war anytime. And which is kind of funny because like 3 years ago, North Korea and the United States has been like the hottest topic on the news, but we don't hear about it anymore. But it's still there. The one thing about nuclear weapon is just because media is not talking about it, it doesn't go away. It's still there. And lots of time, like, yeah, it's about Japan. It's about Bikini Atoll. No, it's not. It's about, it could be any of us. So that's the part of the thing me and Andrew is really trying to convince people that, hey, this issue is still ongoing. This is not about history. And lots of time people think my work is about history. It's not. It's about contemporary issue that we are facing right now. Just continuing the torch that given from the past, but I'm trying to keep it going, really.
Can you talk about, there's a slide, there are very graphic images on the wall in this exhibition, this current
This one?
exhibition? Yeah, those. Can you talk about those?
Sure. I have a lot of like, so this piece was kind of like more spontaneous, but it kind of like a reason I made it. It's like a small, like a snippets of like a reason why. But one of the biggest thing is, so this was made with the paper cutout. You know, the just cut out of the paper. So first time I ever recognized as an artist was in my elementary school, first grade. I was making a paper cut collage, and I got the small prize from the local the art show. So I wasn't doing too hot in my elementary school. I was quite I wasn't invested in studying, let's say that, but I really liked making stuff, and that's the like when I show it to my grandfather, he was like, "Oh, this is great! You're gonna be an amazing artist." And like soon later, he passed away. So that kind of like that paper cut kind of like a stuck with me, and I wanted to make something, and it's such an easier method to make the sequence and photogram. And the shape itself is something I was, so since I kind of invested in making artwork about nuclear issue, and soon later it became about the radiation and cancer. I started to like studying about cancer study. And there's a few friends of mine who went through the cancer itself. They recovered by chemotherapy, and by hearing these stories and doing my own research, these abstracted form, kind of like internalized idea, kind of like became solid in my head, and I needed to like show it to the world in some form. So that's how I made these things. It was my attempt to be a painter. um, Even though like people always says like my work is so painterly, because I don't use camera and it's just nature of the abstraction itself. But I was essentially challenged by like my colleagues. It's like, hey, like like because I was actually painting, but my colleagues was like, hey, try to paint with your photography. I mean, like in a way of like more literal sense. And I was like, good idea. Let me try to do that. The name of the piece is The Myth of a Man-Made Sun. And it's a thing is like, so my grandfather fought against the nuclear weapon, and one of the biggest achievement he did was to establish a healthcare system from the Japanese government. And one of the things that it might surprise you is Japanese government denied about the radiation and radiation poisoning caused by the bomb. So for the longest time, all of the people who got cancer didn't have any governmental support. So that's the part that my grandfather really fought against. And so it kind of like by hearing so many stories, it just became myth. This bomb that happened like 70 years ago, like, oh, it's like, it's a myth. Like no one knows what happened. Like, it's like, no, it happened. It killed my grandfather, or extent, like some extent. But like, here's the thing. A lot of time I get challenged by people. It's like, hey, how can you be sure your grandfather died from the cancer? I mean, the cancer caused by the bomb. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know, because unfortunately the study is, there's not much money in this field, specifically studying about the cancer research associated with the bombing victim. Part of it, there's not many left. Two, it's just, they're not going to make money out of it. So pharmaceutical company, it's not going to invest in that. Maybe some college would do it, but that's pretty much it. So there's so many different studies says, yes, this particular death was caused by the bombing of Hiroshima, and some others say like, no, it was just the cancer could happen anywhere, anytime. And I agree. Like, and that's the reason why I can't be an activist. I don't call myself activist. I'm a storyteller. I am an artist. And that's why, that's why I collaborate with Andrew. That's why I make artwork up in America, because I'm still trying to figure it out what happened to my grandfather.
Yeah.
And it's just a journey. And like through the journey, but one thing I know is I don't want to repeat this to anyone else, to myself, to my kids, if I'm gonna ever have one, to my loved one, to anyone, to experience the devastation that my grandfather experienced.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm keep making artwork, keep expressing this matter, and hopefully people may realize that, hey, the nuclear weapon can, like it is the things we have a control, that one day we might be able to eliminate all of it for better future.
Yeah, let's hope. So
Yeah,
Kei, let's if you want to stop sharing your screen for a second. And we have just a little bit of time, but I would love to see if we have, no, that was fascinating. If we have some questions from the audience, questions, comments. If you want to raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and clear your, open your camera up.
I think David will have a...
Okay, I can't, I'm not seeing that.
Hi, Kei. How are you doing? Nice to meet you. Enjoyed the presentation greatly.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm just kind of curious on your thoughts on permanence, and both within your artwork using sea prints, but also in the larger scheme of the world and those kind of issues.
A lot of time when I make artwork, I think it is more like a performative act. Like I incorporate ritualistic movement using my breath. And when I think about photography, it's all about fixing, right? Like camera is to froze the time. The film is to capture the moment, trap the light inside of it. And I both love about the aspect of photography, but in the same time, I'm like, we can make photography more organic. And that's the reason why I started to not use the camera, to introduce like exposure time as a breath, using like such an unreliable light source, which is the sunlight, because the morning daylight, the lunch, the midday gives a completely different kind of color, intensity, and all of it. But I start think it as kind of like a collaboration with the world, and I think it's the same way for the C print. C print. I used to work as a C print mechanic. I used to have a job that kind of like fixes the machine. Trust me, that thing is so toxic and really finicky. Both love it and hate it doing it anyway. But it's something about the C print that I don't think I can get the same kind of like intensity and significance of my piece that using the sunlight to make this piece with the black and white paper. It's one of it is because how do you tell it's a sunlight? But C print, even though you can recreate that color, but the color is most likely unique to the sunlight. And oh, sorry, we're talking about archive. I'm talking about completely different things. Sorry about that. So actually, like the one of the interesting thing I always thought was I love modernist painting, even though I have an issue with their philosophy and like how white masculine it is. But I love the painting. I always go to the museum and like staring at the Jackson Pollock. But what they used is house paint. It's not gonna last a long time. And the thing is, if C print, house paint, or the pigmented, like anything inkjet print, it doesn't matter what it is. Like if the person who archive the piece dedicated enough to archive it, it would last a long time, probably outlive us. And that's the reason why I always like when I like approach for my piece to be purchased, I usually try to approach museum and institution, because these people knows how to take care of it. And because that's what museum is about, right? Museum is to archive stuff. So that's why I have a kind of like a love for a museum most of the time, so they can preserve my red legacy in a way. It's not the easiest place to go in, but and yeah, and again, like goes back to the performative part. Like if they fade away and color completely changes, like it's part of the nature. It's like if it lives, it lives. And that's the reason why like I always have a hard time trying to make a piece with a digital media, because how permanent it is. And I'm always trying to, because like my friend would always challenges me to, hey, like you always make analog stuff, but why don't you try to use like the digital camera to make some new piece? I'm like, let me think about that. Be saying that for 5 years now. So yeah, it's interesting. I almost prefer the temporariness of the temporary aspect of the photography than the permanent aspect of the photography.
Well, it's also that also speaks to the content of your work.
Absolutely, like it's
but
like
that does make me smile about it's the museum's job to preserve it, which it is, but it's also a little bit like, yeah, we'll fix it in post, right? Like I'm doing this now and they can deal with that later, which is great. Someone else is asking about a little bit about technique. So we're at 6:01. We sort of said it would be an hour. What I'd like to do is sort of formally end the talk, but we can stay on and continue for those who want to. But thank you for coming. For those of you that need to leave, since we are at time, I really appreciate you being here. And for those of you who want to stay, please stay and we can continue the conversation. So they're asking some questions about that they're confused on how you made the sun photos. And
The first one, I would assume.
yes, I believe that's true. And then they were also asking, and this is both technique, and then also they were asking about the burnt glass, and that you said that you fixed the spot and burns with something, and what did you use to fix
Oh
it?
yeah, sure. So I guess I can go one by one. The sun. So I think the piece the person was talking was probably sun gazing prints.
Yes.
It's essentially my signature piece where everything started. It's really simple. The print version of it, not the scroll, but prints. I simply just took the prints outside, like daylight, and exposed it. Didn't even know what to expect. That was really like something I did it because I wanted to make a performance piece, and didn't completely expecting the entire prints to become like completely black. But it surprisingly, it kind of like looks like um, a sun itself. But I think the part that people are confused is the sun gazing scroll, how I made a scroll. Because like it really needs explanation and really like a motion to show it to you. Can everyone see me? Yeah, should be right. So sun gazing scroll, I actually poke a little bit of hole to the ceiling in the darkened studio to let the sunlight in a little bit, like a hole this big. So essentially, I was making a camera obscura in my studio, and the whole roll of the unexposed paper on the bar, and pulling the paper along with the breath. So in front, so like aperture was exposing the sunlight, and so that's why like I was while I was exhaling, I was stopping the movement, thus it was exposing more light to the spot. And when I was pulling, it was giving the less exposure to the spot, thus it's creating the narrow line. And I did it 408 times. The scroll is about I never really calculated, but the Museum of Contemporary Photography did it for me. I think it's like a 215 feet long. I never seen it fully extended because where can I do that? Which is unfortunate. But I make that piece every year on the Hiroshima Day. So it's an annual edition. It kind of goes back to the idea of the Y108, which is it's a ritual event that happens in Japan, the striking the bell 108 times. But to me, like a new year kind of like starts on the Hiroshima Day, because that's the kind of like a beginning of who I am. So I kind of like every year I make this 108 sets of the print or one scroll every year, and kind of like make it like 2012 and 20 edition, 2021 editions. And like sometime it's like, because kind of that's the year, the entire year, and embodiment of the entire year. So like 2021 is actually like, it looked really aggressive. The transition became really, really aggressive, thus kind of like a portraying 2020 itself. So which is kind of interesting. So that's how I made the particularly sun gazing prints. And the glass slide. So what I did was I literally used the candle to expose the glass slide to it. So to make the soot to form on the glass. You gotta be careful, because if you expose it too much, it shatters and like damages your face. But what I did was I was using the paint medium, which is people use to texturize the paint. It uses with acrylic or oil painting. Sometimes like people have like a really, really like a thick paint. That's how they usually do it. So what I did was I actually kind of like a scooped that, and that's translucent. So I fixed it with that thing. So that's why it has like a kind of like an interesting painterly quality to it. And that's came from like a me actually literally painting on it. Actually, that piece I specifically made for the show at the Virginia Museum of Fine Art Museum, Virginia Fine Art Museum. But I actually never shown it anywhere else because that piece is so finicky. Sometimes the glass slide stuck in the projector, and sometimes it shutters inside of it. So until I find a way to actually safely show it, that piece is gonna be keep sitting on my studio's shelf.
Can you digitize
yeah.
it and then project it, or does that take away from the whole
I think
idea of the piece?
I think so. Yeah, I thought about it, and I have a digital recording of like the actual projection and such, but it just doesn't feel the same. This, and plus like the sound that the slide projector makes. I'm pretty sure many of you guys know like how the slide projector sounds. That distinct that it's there's certain finality to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This kind of like, it sounds like almost like a guillotine. So like I always wanted to use that, and three of them just continuously go. It has some kind of like audio cue that puts you into the mindset of like, oh, this is the tone of the artwork. So that's kind of the reason why I want to show it in like in actual physical form, but I probably need to some modification to the projector, the slide projector to do so, but I'm not really tech savvy like that. There's a one time I tried to fix my film camera, completely destroying it. So yeah, I probably need to commission someone to do that. Yeah. So yeah, anyone else asked more questions?
Asking about the sun gazing scrolls, and have you thought about showing them together to sort of show how they change year after year?
It would be amazing. It would be great. I only have two at the moment because three of them are already collected. But my hope is eventually, like 10 years later, maybe like these institutions who own the piece can kind of like get it together, send it to somewhere to exhibit every one of them in the same time. That'd be pretty great. I would love that. I would love that.
That would be amazing. I would love to see that. Have you ever thought about recording the creation of that?
It's kind of hard because like everything is so dark. And like I can probably do it with like the Sony released like a really high ISO capability, like consumable camera. Maybe with that can do that, or maybe the Blackmagic camera has like a really good high ISO. I've been thinking about it, but it's unless like some institution approaches me to say like, hey, like let's make a film about you or something, it's kind of hard to do for say Instagram's sake and such. And plus I think it needs to be done it in, I would love to do it in a performative way. Like I want to invite like 15 people to my studios witnessing me creating the scroll piece. I think that would be amazing. But I think making it into a video, too easy feels like. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more of not like I was thinking more a video of, you know, you like you were saying, a lot of your work is performative, and so maybe a video that is in that vein rather than sort of a documentary video. But
so when I say performative, I want a performative aspect to be evident in the artwork, if that makes sense. It's like Nanjun Pike's line, like making the line, itself is a performative and it's fascinating, but the line itself is also like it's art. It became an artifact of the story and the ritualistic art making, and I think that's the part I'm most fascinated to, not the actual making, because like that's kind of like me doing, like it's like a painter, watching painter paint, which is amazing aspect itself, but should it be part of the, like seeing the artwork and having it next to the piece, does it change anything? Probably. So I think these are the things I can get into, but I'm not quite yet to find the happy medium to enough performative, but also artifact, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I loved your presentation. I really enjoyed hearing the different stories and the way you have an incredible way with words and the way that you use language for not only your titling but also the the ways that you talk about the work. And so I really, the fact that you have these current pieces that you've made that are using language, to me is seems like a natural extension of the way that you're using language about the work. And I would love to see that show. Unless we have any other questions or comments, if you want to raise your hand, I think we're going to get to wrapping it up here. I just want to again. Sorry, go ahead.
I would want to say, like, thank you for everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. When it comes to artist talk, like I've experienced amazing, great amount of people, and sometimes there's a one time I only had 2 people. The snowstorm was happening outside. I was fortunate that 2 people, which was the gallery owner and the gallery owner's daughter. So in the gallery, that the daughter was reading like the Harry Potter while I was giving the talk. So I was like, no, it kind of traumatized me a little bit. But thank you for today. It's so hard to do the talk via online, but like especially listening to like talk online. But no, thank you so much for sticking around, and I really appreciate for coming, and I'm really excited to what I can share a year later when after the fellowship is over. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, the talk was amazing, and thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it, and we will see you soon for another event. Great to see you all.